Oh, everybody. You snuck up on me. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the BA Zone's live pre-show. It's just me this evening. Kathleen is working her magic from afar, and she's handling some business tonight. So it's just going to be an intimate gathering of just me and, whoever 400, 500 people that are out there. So I hope everybody's having a great week so far. Welcome, everybody. Tonight, the comments may or may not come through, so I apologize for that. But if you're on and you want to leave any comments on the bazone.com or any questions, we'll definitely get back to you. But I'm a little technology challenged this evening because I don't have the fancy dancy equipment going on. So so for tonight, that might just be a little stilted depending on the speed of my little fingers here. So tonight's show, we're going to be talking about changing requirements and changing business needs or the business needs. So it should be a fun topic. I don't know anybody out there who hasn't experienced this at one time or another, unless you're really, really a new BA. And if you are, just stay tuned because you'll find some interesting little caveats in what might happen in your career at some point in time. So hopefully everybody's well rested. You got your cup of tea. We're ready to go. Your beverages of choice. Put your feet up on the couch. And listen, if you know anybody out there who might be interested in the information as we're going through, please feel free to tag them and join in. The more, the merrier. And I think Kathleen might be here next week. I'm just not sure. She's working on a special project this month, so she's sort of in and out. But that's the scoop. We just had a horrific thunderstorm here and horrendous heat all week, but we'll be complaining about the cold pretty shortly. So can't complain too much. You're either going to be too hot or you're going to be too cold. Very, very rarely is it just right. So welcome, everybody. If you're just joining us, we're going to go live in about 2 minutes. I'm just sort of dotting the I's and crossing the T's. I'm a little behind schedule this evening. So, how's everybody doing tonight? I've been sort of hanging out in the hospital recently. I don't know if you all caught our show. I think it was a week or two. It might have been 2 weeks ago. And my mother popped in for a cameo, but she happens to be in the hospital right now. She's doing okay, but it's been a little challenging working, trying to get the information you guys need and being down there most of the time. So, but she's doing much better. She's 91. So, as one of the ER doctors says, there's no cure for the birthday disease. And I thought, well, that's a really great way of putting it. It's like you're not going to stop the aging process, but she's doing pretty well. But I don't know if you've ever had to sit in the hospital, but it can be really, really tiring just sitting there because I don't know if it's the air or what it is, but it might be that I'm just washing my hands 50,000 times while I'm there because it's like open things with elbows, it's kind of that type of thing. But yeah, so that's been my week so far. I hope you're having a much better time. As I said, tonight we're going to be talking about changing requirements or business needs. And it's always, at some point in your career, that's going to happen. You're going to run up against, you've signed off on requirements, and guess what? There's a ton of changes that happen, and they could happen anytime. And we're going to talk about that. And actually, we can start talking about that now. It is 8 o'clock. And welcome to the live show. We are now live. I'm Marianne Morrison. I'm part of the BA Zone. My other half, our little cohort there, is Kathleen Sinnott. She's working on a special project this month, so she might pop in depending if she finishes early. But tonight you've got me. And you can find us obviously in all the places. We don't have our little slide to show up, I don't think, this evening. But you can find us on Twitter and Yahoo and Periscope and Facebook, and you can always reach us at thebazone.com as well. That's our website. And feel free to drop us any comments there or suggestions for show. Most of our show ideas come from your suggestions because this is what you want to learn about. And that's what we're here for. So and also, as always, if you find this information helpful or interesting, or you want to, send us some hearts or thumbs up, we always appreciate that. And obviously, if you know anyone who might benefit from this, or just uh, find the information interesting, or just feel like you just want to be plain entertained, please tag them and have them join along. And we truly like to help people, so we don't mind. So let's get right to it. So tonight we're going to be talking about the changing requirements or business needs. So as I was saying just before I came on our live show, I don't think there is a business analyst out there that hasn't come across this at some point in their career, unless they're really new at it. And it's sort of like, you get those requirements, you think they're locked down, and just when you think you're out, they pull you back. And tonight, we're going to talk about why we sometimes experience this sort of revolving door of requirements or change requests that happen throughout the project. And it could be any phase throughout the project lifecycle, and some tips on how to handle that. So let's just take a look at what we consider the 5 most common that we've come across reasons for change requests and why they happen. And why, as BAs, we're always asking why and how, why this happens and how we can make it better. So one of the reasons that you'll see a lot of changes sometimes is external factors, things that we can't control. We have no control over whatsoever. So that's because, if you're in a business that has government or regulatory changes or laws or FCC or HIPAA changes, these are types of things that, if your business relies on that, you're going to have to implement. And when those type of things happen, they happen by a certain deadline, and usually there's a fairly decent lead time. However, you have to plan for that. And if you have things already going on, you're going to have to move that stuff out and plan it for other releases and focus on some of these external factors that happen if your business depends on it. That's sort of out of our control. Sometimes the needs of the business change. It could be due to mergers or acquisitions, or just a change in general priorities or directions. And some of that can be controllable, but not always. I can think of one point where we were working on a project, actually. It was in healthcare, because we do a lot of healthcare business. And we were halfway through requirements gathering for a company that wanted a case management program. And they also had a disease management program with a different solutions vendor. And that solutions vendor decided to bail on them. They were no longer going to support the product. And there was a lot more patients on the DM side, disease management side, than there was on the case management side. So midway through the project, we had to completely stop and refocus on a completely similar product, but it is very different. They had different flows, different screens, everything was different. So in that case, this was a business opportunity. I mean, we were able to create a suite of products for this particular client. And we wound up, because we did disease management, then we did case management, we did critical care, we did cardiology, women's health, and neonatal. So, it wasn't easy. It was very exciting. But again, it wasn't easy switching from a suite of products, from one component to a suite of products. And you had to have a general idea of how everything worked. So, that's the type of thing that can happen. You can the business needs completely change. And again, through really no one's fault other than, a vendor pulling out. That's just one example of how business priorities change. And, we're fairly flexible as business analysts. We have to be, right? That's our job. But that's a second reason. A third reason is that users or customers are just not sure of what type of functionality they actually need. And you say to yourself, well, how does that happen? How can they not know what they need? So there's sort of several reasons that might happen. For example, maybe a subject matter expert is in control, but they no longer have hands-on with the users. They don't even actually know what the users are doing anymore. So there could be a very big disconnect there. Users may have trouble identifying or articulating what they need. They may only know what they know. You know what I mean? So, for example, meaning they can't see beyond what the system that they are currently using does. So they're not sure what they need because they only know one thing. So they may know in that system what doesn't work, but they can't necessarily tell you why or how they need it to change. And some of the ways that we handle that is what I like to call research and return. Um, we don't wait for the answers to come from the users. We will do a lot of research. We'll look at the way they work. We'll look at training manuals. We'll look at policies and procedures. We will shadow the people. That's the biggest thing. Shadow the people if you can. And a lot of companies don't allow you to have this type of contact with users. And if they don't, make friends at the coffee machine and then walk them over to their desk and just kind of watch what what do you do? And you have a simple conversation. Not often are we restricted from users. The people want these systems to go and these projects to go well. So almost certainly you can talk your way into watching someone work. We've done, it's sort of like being, when I say shadow people, kind of sounds like, something in the policing industry, you'll do, a journalist might do a ride along with a police officer, those ride alongs. And I've actually ridden along with a nurse and gone on home visits, so that type of thing. You want to watch what they're doing and watch what they're not doing. Watch what they're reaching for that's not in the system, that they're doing externally from the system. These are the type of things that the system needs to do to support their workflow and to streamline their process. So those are kind of the little tips there. You can also, talk to, if you can't have access to actual users, you can find people who are in the industry and see the kind of issues they might be having. It's not quite the same, but again, it gives you a heads up. You can go out to the internet as well. And once you do all that research and return, you want to give something back to these users. You want to show them the possibilities of how you can make their life better. That's basically what it is. So you want to give them options to select from. So if there's a particular screen and you're not exactly sure how that screen should flow or a process should flow, you can show them 3 different options and say, what do you think this would work better for you, or this would work better for you? And little by little, they start to understand the creative process and they start to get into it. And the best way to do that I know is with pictures. I mean, not to focus on crime this week, but I mean, sketch artists in police departments, they help victims or witnesses, identify someone, identify that's the person, sort of thing. So it's sort of that same concept. Give somebody a visual and you'll help them articulate their needs because they can sort of put it into perspective. You can also, if you're trying to show them some type of functionality, if you can find similar functionality out there in the internet somewhere on some type of application or website, so that they can get the idea of, oh, that might work for me type of thing. So that's always the issue when someone doesn't know what they need. Another issue that we see an awful lot of is the user gets confused with what they want versus what they need. And this can happen at all levels of management, executives, users. Just because you want something, it's the old adjective, if it doesn't mean that you actually need it, right? So this is sort of late night shopping at its best, right? So this is what QVC and everybody sort of does out there. This is that shiny new object that has all the bells and whistles that distracts the buyer from what they may actually need. And they wind up sort of just wanting it because it's like so cool, it's so new. It goes beyond that, and it can be that, well, the mentality may be that the competition has it, so we must need it too. That's another way of looking at it. Or the belief that that I'm not sure if we need it, but if we don't get it now, we may never get it type of thing. Or maybe the executive team is really, really creative, or you have product teams that are really creative. But they're not all that practical because they're constantly creating new things. Their minds are in that creative mindset. and they're not thinking along the practical terms. It could be a development team that is in kind of the conversation, and they want to implement the newest, coolest technology, because after all, we love to implement the newest and coolest technology. So what can we do with some of these? I mean, did these ring any bells with you guys? I mean, these are things that we hear on a regular basis, and it's sort of each one you can take, but collectively you can do a few things. You have to really have conversations and identify their real needs, right? So you sort of have to do a little research about their wants and why do they think they want something, or do they think they need it, to differentiate between a want or a need. And I'm not saying to discount the shiny new object, because there's something about that shiny new object that is actually attracting them and captivating them. And is there actually some underlying feature that might be in that new shiny object or program that you could build or find somewhere else? And maybe it's just a feature. Maybe it's one feature that the user's saying, yeah, that's what I want because it does this. So it may not, be an actual, it's sort of a want, it's sort of a need. You've got to separate the two out. You definitely have to separate the two out. And most of the people are looking at these shiny objects without actually looking at the problems that exist to see whether it'll solve all these problems. Sometimes it's just that sometimes the existing system they're working on is so bad, and we've come across this many, many times. It's just so bad that anything that comes along is better than what they have, or they think is better than what they have. So once you do all of that sort of research, then instead of distracting them with the shiny new object, we sort of counter distract them away from the shiny object by focusing on things that will make their job easier or seamless, solve their problems, because that's really what they're looking for. Even though they see something they're attracted to, they're definitely looking for a way to solve their particular problems. So you can incorporate some of those features you find elsewhere and into whatever application you're building or buying, and get the same effect. So you want to position your solution as opposed to the shiny new object, and you can do this various ways. If you wanted to do a real comparison of the program that they're attracted to, you could do it in sort of like a grid form and say, this is the product, this is the features, and these are the needs they solve. And oh, by the way, here are some other needs you actually have that this doesn't resolve. And this is how we're going to combine some of the features from here, what you actually need to give you this brandy new solution. And you really have to sell that solution. I mean, part of our jobs is to sort of influence the business and sort of persuade them to lean a certain way. And you want to do that. And especially, I mean, if that shiny new object actually does solve all your problems, by all means, then get it. But if we're actually creating something or building it ourselves and designing it ourselves, that's what you have to do. And once you do have what you think is a solution, find someone amongst the user groups that are going to be using the particular tool. Find someone who's not exactly a cheerleader, but somebody that they trust, who can actually, and I don't mean do it in a rah-rah sort of way, but actually say, I really think this will help. And you actually have to have people do that with someone they trust. You as a business analyst, if they trust you. If you're new, they may not know you, but find someone who trusts that and work directly with that person to spread that information out until there's a tipping point, and then people are on board with that. But there's a really fine line with some people as to their wants and needs, and you really have to be very clear that this particular product is not going to satisfy all of your needs, and here's why. Okay. The last, is it the last one? The last one that we come across all the times, and this actually does happen, is that the requirements are not fully defined. Now, this may not be, and I don't want you to think of it, oh my God, I'm a business, and it's my fault, everything's my fault. They may try to make it your fault, but it's not always your fault. I mean, if you're an inexperienced BA, it can happen. You can definitely miss stuff because you're learning, and that's the whole process. Other reasons that requirements may be missed, however, is that maybe not all the right users or stakeholders were involved in the requirements gathering or elicitation and approval process. It happens all the time. You know, the wrong people are in the room. They have no idea. Again, it may be that they're management, but they're not direct users, and they may be they may think that the users are doing something, then they may not be. It's a disconnect, and it happens. It happens quite often. There could be the solutions were being defined, as in the shiny new object, to keep using that phrase. Solutions were defined before the problems were fully identified. And that happens too. I mean, they say, we need this. And again, it goes back to they've seen something and they want it without really knowing whether it's going to solve their issues. There may be a lack of communication from different levels between clients, executive teams, account managers, product managers, web designers, what have you. And that can cause a disconnect where the requirements are not fully fleshed out. There could also be conflicting requirements from different stakeholders. They could be from different departments. They could be within the same department, and one believes it should be a certain way and the other should be a certain way. And, you know, the best way to handle that is to sort of take them into a separate room and try to work through it. I mean, you'd have to work through it, obviously. But that if you don't do that while the requirements gathering is going on, you can have requirements that are not fully fleshed out or not fully defined. So what do you do in that case? I mean, the first place you have to identify the key stakeholders and the decision makers, because at some point you're going to come to an impasse and someone has to make a decision. And the key stakeholders, obviously, you want to try to get ones that are closest to who are you going to be using the system as possible. You know, sometimes we have no choice in who we get with that, but we definitely try. If you can, involve the actual users, if you can, even if it's just to, once you pass maybe some wireframe designs, you know, little pictures of how you think a process should look, or a product or a page or a screen. If you can pass it, go past the key stakeholders and say, look, can we just show some different level users, you know, a skilled user, a new user type of thing, and see what they think and see if it's intuitive. That helps tremendously also to catch any missed requirements or to get buy-in. And you can run that past quality assurance people too. They'll come up with things you have not even thought of. So definitely involve them as well. Also, you want to involve different key stakeholders at the right time. For example, what I was saying before is that, you know, sometimes solutions are defined before the problem is actually even identified or solved. This can happen sometimes when you get developers involved too early in the requirements gathering or elicitation process. You know, developers like to develop, they like to be, they're creative, a lot of them, many of them, and they'll try to come up with solutions to one piece of a puzzle, not knowing all the other pieces. And, you know, sometimes when they speak and they get users excited, it can be a problem because then you cannot get those users. It takes a while to get them to refocus on, but what are your actual issues around this? What are we doing? What are all, you know, all that detailed information. So you want to be careful about when you pull people in your process. You absolutely have to have developers review. And the best way to do that is to do some elicitation. If you have some ideas, take it to the developer and say, what do you think? Will this work? Will speed be affected? Will anything be affected? Get that information and then go back to the elicitation process. You know, you can have them directly in the room with users as well. But again, it can become very distracting because they have a specific thing that they want to do, and it sort of pulls everyone's attention in a different direction. So I just be careful with that. And you can also explain not to forward meetings. a lot of times meeting invites, assure people that everyone will be part of the process. But a lot of times developers get invited and different people get invited because somebody says, oh, that person should really be in this meeting. And it's not always true. So you've got to sort of set that up front and say, we'll really include everybody, but right now we need to focus on this particular piece. And it's not a great idea to pull people away from their job as well. Everybody's time is valuable, and you don't really want to pull them out ahead of time when they're not really needed at this point. They will be needed at some point. And again, involve the, you can have joint application design sessions down the road and involve users as well. So we've only talked about 5 of the most common categories of reasons for requirement change or scope creep, what we call scope creep, after the requirements are done and signed off on. So when it happens to you, and it will happen to you, don't shoulder the entire responsibility, because there's a lot of reasons why requirements get missed or changes occur that we have to go back and redo things. Just make sure that you have a plan to minimize it as much as possible, without losing the connection you've built with the client or your coworkers or the people within your organization if you're working on requirements for those folks. Because that's the biggest thing. You're building up a connection, and you don't want to continue deny someone something that they might need. So it's sort of a little fine line that we walk as business analysts. But you can definitely, it's a skill that's sort of learned, but you don't want to lose that connection. So that's just the first part. And before I get into 5 of my favorite sort of prevention and planning tips to help you minimize or avoid some of the stress associated with some of these change requests, just let me remind you that if you have any topics that you would like us to cover on the BA Zone on future shows, feel free to drop us a line at thebazone.com. We want to provide you with what you need. We really do enjoy helping you. And many of our shows, like I said, come directly from you guys and from our audience. So please, we appreciate you watching. We love having you, and definitely let us know what you're struggling with, what you'd like to learn about. If you're a new business analyst, we've been in the business for, I don't even want to tell you how many years we've been in the business, a very long time. So definitely we've experienced a lot, and we'd love to share it with you. And don't forget to join our mailing list so you can be first in line to know what's happening on the show, or be the first to receive notification of special offers, such as regarding our classes that we have out there before anyone else does. And rest assured that we're not going to sell your information. We're not going to give it away or do anything with it. We do believe in karma and in doing the right thing. So definitely check out. We have a few classes out there you can check out. So please visit thebazone.com. Okay. So let's go on to 5 tips that I think will help you minimize or manage your change requests that happens. The biggest thing that most people don't do, and we say it again and again, is to set expectations and ground rules. So when you go into a project, the first thing you want to do is, and if there's a lot of change, if you've been working in a company where there seems to be a lot of change requests that happen continually, the best thing you might want to do is, in addition to getting requirements signed off, you might, prior to requirements, do a scope document. What's in scope, what is out of scope, and have the key stakeholders sign that as well. That sort of becomes your template for what's in and what's out. And you want to keep it sort of refined enough that they can't group 50,000 things under one in-scope topic, so you want it to be at sort of a mid-level, not too high, not too detailed, but definitely it's just a bulleted list. This is in scope. And if you're doing it by iterations or releases, so maybe you have 3 phases to a project. So you would have phase 1, and this is what phase 1 is, and here's all the bulleted things that are going to go into it. And then you want to say what is out of scope. And the first thing, unless it is actually part of your in scope, the first thing in out of scope is we will out of scope a complete redesign of the system. That's usually the first thing that's out of scope, unless you are actually redesigning your entire software application. So some of the things that are in scope and out of scope, and you can say they're out of scope for this iteration or this phase, or they'll be in, you could list all the phases, phase 4, 5, 6, whatever you want to do, and say this is what's in or this is what's out of scope, and get them to sign off on that. It helps with getting your requirements done in time. If the scope keeps meandering, because sometimes people include their scope in the requirements document, which is fine. But if you find that they can't quite get the requirements signed off, they keep going back and making change after change after change, and coming up with ideas over the top, you can put those ideas in a parking lot, but they're out of scope. This is what's in scope. And that helps a lot. It helps with those endless rounds of requirements that sometimes occur especially when people are very creative, and you say one thing and it triggers a creative thought 4 steps down in the process that may be out of scope. So you definitely want to put them in a parking lot for later review and move on, so you're not down in the weeds with that sort of thing. Second thing to set expectations is to make sure that they understand that when the requirements are signed, they will be frozen for that portion of the project, meaning we're not going to make a complete overhaul change of them. You've got to let them know could it happen? It could possibly happen because a business need might change. But to set that ground rule that says, okay, once we've signed off on these requirements, we've got to move on to something else. If we find something, we'll try to move it into later releases. But otherwise, you're going to go through this monotony of, we're going to relook at the requirements and we're never going to get those requirements done. And for, like in an agile environment where they're doing sprints or what have you, they're signing off on those. Well, they're not really signing off. There's not a whole lot of requirements there, but they are in smaller iterations. You could create smaller iterations too, to try to consolidate and keep people within the scope. If you make something too big, people just sort of get lost. So you could try to cut these requirements, big requirements, down into smaller iterations and smaller phases so that you can move through them a little quicker. Now, a lot of times we've had in the past, we're like, oh, so the requirements are going to be frozen after I sign them? Well, I'm not going to sign them. That's fine. If you want to say that you're not going to sign the requirements and they'll be perpetually open, well, no, that's not the case. So you have to let them know up front that it's fine if you don't want to sign off on these requirements, but development will not begin until they're signed, until they're completed and signed. And you have other projects waiting in the wings. So we don't want to miss this window of opportunity. Then we've got to move on these requirements. A third thing you could do to set expectations or to have a plan is to, as a group with these key stakeholders, create a plan that says, okay, what happens if we discover that something is missing or it was designed incorrectly? And this could happen, and it would depend on, you'd have to have a plan for each phase. Okay, what are we going to do if we're still in a requirement solicitation? Well, obviously you have a lot of bandwidth if you haven't signed off on there. But post requirements, how far down the road are we going to continue to change these? Give me a time limit. Are we going to make changes in development? Are we going to make changes while it's in QA and testing? When we get to user acceptance testing, users find a lot of things when they have hands-on if they haven't had a chance to have hands-on before that. So what is the plan for that? And do it together so that everyone knows what to expect. Define together what will be considered a critical, a high, a medium, or low type of enhancement, meaning it's not in the original requirements. And you can do this with bugs as well, or errors. So for example, you may say, okay, it's only critical if it literally stops the business, if it literally stops the forward flow of an order or a product. It's sort of along the same lines as you must have this, or it's sort of a nice to have. And the nice to have is always sort of, we'll bundle them together maybe in a future release type of thing. And you want to keep that list of running requests and changes so that you can evaluate them. Number two, the second big tip is communicate. So a lot of times no one communicates enough, right? So you need to hold stakeholder review meetings, and you need to communicate these lists of changes that you're finding together as a group. You're going to look at them against the original scopes, the approved requirements, and depending on where you are in the project, what the size of them might be, the impact of the change downstream. Is it just is it key functionality, or is it a tiny little change that we might add? But keep in mind those tiny little changes add up. And then you're going to determine if the changes or adds can be pushed off to a future release. And you'll find that when you have these meetings, and you have them often, and I don't know however often you guys are moving through your projects, weekly has always worked. You'll find that people are very accommodating if they know what's going to happen. If they know it's going to happen, not this release, the next release, or I can get this small change in, people are far more open to moving things through and getting things along and getting them done. Number three, as a business analyst, you should always add a buffer to your timeline. So if something does come up, and you can't add tons of days, but project managers will say, typically how long will this take you to do, type of thing, based on your previous experience. You may always want to pad a couple of days here and there, because there are going to be times when you are going to have to rework some part of a requirement document, and you need time to do that. So, these changes that another thing that people don't realize is it affects everything. It affects the business analyst. It could affect potential training. It could push additional future releases out even further if they keep working on this. So you want to bring that up front so they actually understand the process of how this works. There's a lot of people that think, well, you just hire more people and you can get it done. Well, that's not the case, because those people haven't been involved from the very beginning, and it slows the process down, actually. So if you tell them up front, explain it up front, it helps tremendously. A little more difficult for some people, number four, is to learn to say no, but know when to say yes. So you've got to know when to say, okay, we cannot do this. And if you need backup from a manager or check with a manager, that's fine. But you do at sometimes have to say no. On the other hand, you can't be so rigid that you never say yes because the requirements were signed off and that's all we're going to do. It doesn't work that way. So you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, type of thing. So you definitely need to say yes. You can, and in the back of your mind, you can say yes to a few smaller things. Sometimes we think the giant features make the difference to a user, but that's not always true. Sometimes it's this tiny little thing that aggravates the heck out of them that you can add to a requirements document that's already signed off on, and you'll be a star. It's as simple as that. It's like, what is that one little annoying thing that's driving them crazy? And it may not mean much to us at all. But to get that into that requirements document, you're a superstar when you do that. So look for those type of things. Know when to say, learn to say no and know when to say yes. That's a big one. And the fifth and final one is sometimes you're going to run up against really unreasonable expectations or requests. No matter how well you've primed the pump and gotten everybody on board, somebody is going to stick to their guns. You're going to say no, and they're going to say, but why, but why, but why? And it's going to run up the chain of command. The best way, to handle those type of unreasonable expectations is to use the change management process. Talk in terms of money and time. Once you start talking how expensive things will be, how much will this cost? Most of the time, clients don't want to give you extra money or extra time, but the fact of the matter is it's going to cost them more to do certain things that are beyond the scope of what was originally agreed. This is where a project manager comes in really handy if you have one. You're supposed to continue to be the good cop, helping the customer. You don't want to come off as the the one that's saying no, no, no all the time. So it's helpful to get somebody else looped in there, because you're the one who needs to be the bridge between the users or the client and your particular company. So you want to focus on how much it will cost, how much longer it will take to develop. And it's not just development, right? It's QA, it's training, it's business analysts, it's development, it's a whole slew of time that it will take to deliver. And then the third thing is what other projects potentially will have to be delayed because they're insisting on this particular change. So this kind of reminds me of all those home renovation shows you see on TV, sort of like, well, we're going to do all of this stuff for you, but then we found carpenter ants, and now we have to take care of them. So that affects the budget and the timeline. And so we are going to have to fix it because we have to. But that bathroom reno that you wanted, we can't do that unless we have extra money and extra time. So, you know, a lot of these TV shows, they are definitely analogies for our jobs. So with a little flexibility and a little process in there, you know, the changes that will need to be made occasionally, but not consistently with every release, will be easier and easier for you. So, and that's all I have for tonight. 37 minutes. We didn't do too bad. I hope you enjoyed the show. I love doing it. Again, if you have any questions or if you have any show ideas, please visit thebazone.com. We love, love, love to hear from you. And definitely come back next Tuesday. And other than that, I hope you all have a great night. Thank you, everybody. Take care.